Tonight on The Buzz, we are looking at virtual reality and augmented reality. We start with Jim Malcolm, General Manager for North America for Humaneyes. They make the Views VR camera. Jim shares his thoughts on where VR is heading and how we can start experimenting with it today. Next, we look at a specific example of an AR application, Geogram, developed by the Awe Company. CEO Srinivas Krishna explains the difference between VR and AR and showcases the areas where AR is most likely to be successful initially. Next, Ethan Shaftel is a writer and director of immersive experiences and VR storytelling. He shares his thoughts on how VR differs from traditional filmmaking and describes his process and software that he uses to create 2 recent VR films. Next, Matthew Celia is the creative director of Lightsail VR. Tonight, he talks about the challenges in creating his latest VR project, Speak of the Devil, along with the gear that he used. All this, plus James DeRuvo with the weekly DoddleNEWS update. The Buzz starts now.
Since the dawn of digital filmmaking,
authoritative.
One show serves a worldwide network of media professionals.
Current.
Uniting industry experts,
Production.
filmmakers,
Post-production.
and content creators around the planet.
Distribution.
From the media capital of the world in Los Angeles, California, the Digital Production Buzz goes live now.
Welcome to the Digital Production Buzz, the world's longest-running podcast for the creative content industry covering media production, post-production, and marketing around the world. Hi, my name is Larry Jordan. Tonight, we're revisiting VR and adding a look at AR, which is short for augmented reality. We've avoided AR in the past because it tends to require less filmmaking and more development and engineering. However, tonight, we learn about an application that is releasing this week that combines AR with filmmaking. You'll be interested in our interview with Srinivas Krishna as he tells us more about it. I'll have more on this in my Just Thinking segment at the end of the show, but as you listen to tonight's interviews, ask yourself, how can exploring VR enable me to add more services to offer to my current or potential clients? Jim Malcolm's thoughts on an inexpensive way to start experimenting with VR can be very useful in your thinking. This will be an interesting show. Before we start, though, I want to invite you to subscribe to our free weekly show newsletter at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Every issue, every week, provides quick links to the different segments on the show, plus articles of interest to filmmakers. And best of all, it's free and comes out every Saturday. And now it's time for our weekly DoddleNEWS update with James DeRuvo. Hello, James.
Hello, Larry. This is your 1-month call to NAB.
I'm already starting to get press releases of people saying, here's what we're going to announce at NAB. So I think other people are aware of that fact, too.
As the news guy for Doddle, I'm more than happy about because it's been a dry month.
February is always hard because nobody wants to talk about anything. They're gearing up for NAB.
I'm going to be busy for the next month or so that's going to be fun.
It will be fun. I'm looking forward to all the news and all the new products. And that gets us to the news this week. What's happening?
There's an indication that Canon may be shifting focus to mirrorless cameras for their consumer DSLR camera production. Based on an interview with Canon President of Marketing Masahiro Sakata, Canon may be shifting focus of their consumer division away from DSLRs and to mirrorless designs, and the M50, which we talked about last week, may be their first step. Sales and rental trends show that users tend to prefer the smaller form factor of a mirrorless camera, so it looks like Canon is kind of tired of playing second fiddle to Sony and Panasonic.
Well, hasn't Canon built their reputation on DSLRs, which are inherently mirrored cameras?
That's why I kind of think that they're not going to forsake their DSLR-centric clientele just to focus solely on mirrorless designs moving forward. But it could mean that because of the fact that mirrorless cameras are so popular, they're reacting finally to that trend, and they're going to start focusing more of their design improvements and testing them out in mirrorless consumer cameras first before they get seeded down into the DSLRs.
All right, that's news from Canon. What else is happening?
You may remember last week we talked about ProGrade, the new media card company that was started to fill the gap left by Lexar closing not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
They have announced that they're not going to be supporting XQD media cards for both Nikon and Sony. They want to push those manufacturers to go for the newer Compact Flash Express format, which they say will be backwards compatible with XQD, but will have faster file transfer speeds.
James, back up a step. Tell me what ProGrade is, and then tell me what the significance of this news is.
ProGrade was a company that was started by former executives of both Lexar and SanDisk who wanted to start a company to fill the gap left by when Lexar was closed. If you look at their line of SD cards and CFast cards, they look exactly like a Lexar, right on down to the color scheme. So they want to create high-performing media cards, and it sounds to me like these guys are now free to push for their preferred formats. Clearly, they support the upcoming Compact Flash Express format over XQD, but the only hiccup is that they have to convince Nikon and Sony to enable support for Compact Flash Express with a future firmware update. And until then, they're going to be focusing on producing CFast 2 and SD cards in the near future.
Okay, that's ProGrade. What's our third story this week?
We just had the Oscars, as everybody knows, and it was very exciting to see Roger Deakins finally get his due. But if you look at how many cameras were used in all the Oscar-nominated and winning films, it looks like Arri, once again, was the big winner. Arri scored the most nominations and wins amongst features at this year's Academy Awards. Meanwhile, film is firmly back as Steven Spielberg's The Post and Paul Thomas Anderson's Phantom Thread were both nominated for Best Picture, and they were shot using Panavision's Panaflex XL2.
Arri has been around for a long time. What makes this announcement interesting to you?
Well, what I find most interesting wasn't that Arri cleaned up at the awards. They usually do every year. But that Red was practically non-existent, even in nominations. Red continues to push the state of the art, though, and that makes everything move. I just thought it was interesting that they weren't around.
Okay. What are the stories you're following this week?
Well, other stories we're following include there's some great DIY solutions this week, including a $20 shock mount that looks and works great. Pomfort goes into beta with their latest live grade color correction software. And Amazon is going after YouTube in the streaming wars.
And where can people go on the web to learn about these and other stories?
All these stories and more can be found at DoddleNEWS.com.
And James DeRuvo is the editor-in-chief of DoddleNEWS and joins us every week. James, thank you, and we'll talk to you next Thursday.
See you next Thursday.
Starting Monday, April 9, join the digital production buzz at the 2018 NAB Show in Las Vegas, Nevada. Larry Jordan and the Buzz team are taking their microphones on the road to cover the latest news and announcements from the largest media show in the world. Every hour of every day, the Buzz is live on the trade show floor. More than 100 interviews, creating 27 new shows in 4 days. The Buzz has webcast directly from NAB for 10 years, and our coverage is legendary, heard in more than 195 countries around the world. If you're attending the show, visit us at booth SL10-527 and say hello. If you can't attend, visit nabshowbuzz.com for a schedule of shows and guests. That's nabshowbuzz.com and join the Buzz at NAB.
Jim Malcolm is the General Manager, North America for Humaneyes Technologies. He's responsible for managing the Views VR camera product ecosystem, as well as all the other Humaneyes products. He also sits on the board of directors for the Consumer Technology Association and is the immediate past president of the Imaging Alliance. And before joining Humaneyes, he was president and chief marketing officer of Ricoh Imaging Americas Corporation. Hello, Jim. Welcome.
Hi. How are you today?
How would you describe Humaneyes?
Humaneyes is an innovative technology company that really has its roots in graphic arts and computer animation, but started to see the real benefit in future and virtual reality, and has applied its technology and patents to really defining the future of virtual reality.
Well, one of the ways that you're defining it is a product called the Views VR camera. What's this?
So the Views camera is really a very powerful camera system, self-contained, that basically takes two series of video, one for your left eye and one for your right eye, and automatically creates what we call VR video. This is something that you can play back in a VR headset and see everything around you in full 3D with ambisonic audio.
I hate to break it to you, but most of us would call this stereoscopic 3D, and you're calling it VR. How come?
Because it's the intent of the camera, in fact, not just our camera, but the category, is to play the product back in a headset. And unlike when you would look at 3D stereoscopic on a movie screen or on a flat 2D environment, the intent of VR video is to be able to allow you to look everywhere and add interactivity to that video as well.
So are you shooting a 360-degree image off the left eye and a separate 360-degree image off the right eye?
That's correct. So the camera systems actually have, in our world, a series of 8 cameras. We use 4 of those to create a 4K spherical video for your left eye, the other 4 for 4K video for your right eye. We put those together in software, sync them and time them, and make sure that the color matches. So when you put it into the headset, you have this seamless 360-degree 3D world really captured from 2 different viewing perspectives.
How do you deal with issues like nausea and disorientation? Because a lot of people would not be used to viewing this.
It's a really big challenge. One of the biggest complaints about VR is, wow, it makes me feel nauseous. I'll go back to the early days of motion pictures, back when people sat in movie theaters for the first time and they felt nauseous inside of a movie theater. The brain wasn't used to the experience. So there's a couple things that happen. One is the technology's improved, which makes things a little bit easier inside the headset. Frame rates and color and syncing between each eye. But also very important to it is creators are learning special techniques or discipline techniques in order to shoot in a way that you don't make your viewer sick.
For instance?
In the past, when people first started shooting with VR, maybe they would do a handheld shot across a room. And the problem with that is, regardless of how steady you are, you start getting a little bit of, shake to the movement, or it kind of goes up and down. Well, your brain's not used to dealing with this. So either a camera placement that's stationary and move your action around it, or a stable camera platform that moves the camera very uniformly is a lot better way to keep people in a headset without feeling nauseous.
Is it not only an issue of camera stabilization, but also resolution? Does higher resolution improve the viewing experience?
It's a tough one to answer. And the reason I hesitate is I've been in experiences that are pixelated and have terrible image quality, but they don't make you sick. So in and of itself, it's not the resolving power. In fact, all of these VR headsets today really don't have the greatest image because they don't really have the highest resolution. What's more important than the resolution is the actual frame rates. So if you take the same experience and view it in a mobile VR, like on a Gear VR headset that plays back in 30 frames per second, you might feel a little bit more nauseous or a little more uncomfortable. Let's not even call it nauseous. You might feel more uncomfortable there than if you took that same video and played it back on something like an HTC Vive, which the computer takes that video and reses it up to 90 frames per second. That higher frame rate eliminates pulse when you're looking around quickly in that headset and help give you a more comfortable experience.
One of the things that we're all looking at in VR is how it breaks out of being a niche product into a mass market product. And it seems to me that the big gating factor is this headset that we have to wear, as opposed to AR, which can be seen on, say, a mobile device. Do you think it's possible for VR to achieve mainstream status, or is the experience itself, because it needs a headset, going to be limited to more specific applications?
VR is going to make mainstream status, and it's going to first start probably at your workplace, whether it's training, education, remote conferencing. There's a lot of very practical applications for wearing a headset. It's those kind of defined disciplines that are going to allow us then to open the door towards social VR and VR for entertainment and some of the other components. But what's interesting right now in the news and in the press, you see a lot of discussion around the entertainment properties, right? There was this movie or there was this event or whatever. And like just the Olympics were just shot in VR. And people are trying to understand like what's the value to that. You can take that same technology, that same capability, and apply it to, I don't know, how to inspect an oil rig before you fly somebody out to that platform. And you can deliver a very rich experience, pay all kinds of value to it, and people don't think about the entertainment, they think about the practical part. We will start to incorporate VR into our everyday workplace, and then we'll start to bring it into our everyday social worlds.
It seems to me that the initial foray with VR is going to be experiences in education, because I think narrative is going to take us a while to develop. Would you agree with that?
I think that's true. We're already seeing it. And what's interesting from an education point of view, which I didn't expect, originally, the educators were looking at how do I share my course, my class, or my discussion in virtual reality. That's kind of plateaued a little bit, but we see this huge spike in learning institutions themselves adopting the Views camera in order to teach the principles of VR. And the reason they use it as a teaching tool is they can teach virtual reality without having to make the students computer programmers, which really opens up a much larger audience to VR, including journalism, I don't know, the list goes on, education, government, law enforcement, where classes, you can have a class on just about anything, and people can start to create content without having to become a programmer.
If you were to advise a filmmaker, not necessarily to create narrative fiction, because for me the jury is still out on that, but the idea of experiences and education makes perfect sense. If you were to advise them on how to create content for 360 VR, what are some of the top rules they need to keep in mind as they're starting their own production experience?
Yeah, so I'll first say that I hate rules, but you do need some rules or guidelines to get started, right? Because the principles of storytelling remain the same. And I think my biggest frustration to us as an industry is that because a lot of people haven't figured out how to tell a narrative in a VR headset, then the whole narrative story kind of gets a bum rap.
And you don't think it should?
I don't think that it should, because the opportunity to tell a story, regardless of the medium, is there. And it is so much more immersive and so much more impactful. But again, the problem that we have is that too many people have tried to simply replace a camera placement or replace a production that they used to do with a 2D or a fixed view camera with a virtual reality camera with mixed results. But if you actually start by creating the script and the dialogue from the very beginning as a VR narrative, how you bring that story to life, it makes sense that it's in a headset. It makes it have a purpose. And I think that's the biggest gap. And I guess my recommendation, if you're starting to dabble with, explore, or quite frankly, even deliver for your clients, make sure whatever you make has got a story, the same way that you would do with any other video or film equipment.
One of the ideas that I found very helpful in understanding VR was to think of it not as the typical filmmaking experience, but more like creating live theater, where you still have creative control, but the process is different between the two. Would you think that's a good analogy?
I actually think that's a great analogy. And the reason that I like that analogy is when we think about directing an existing film, right? You've got your craft cart and the sound guy and the lighting guys, right? And you're working in a confined space. But when you do look at that whole stage and you know that your audience is there and you know that you've got to kind of keep all of your support off or out of view, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think that the challenge of the director who's used to filming in 2D traditional film, right? Well, maybe has a much more difficult time getting that in the head than somebody who's directing stage performances. So I hadn't thought about that, but I think live stage performance, that kind of core competency that it takes to be able to create that, is absolutely the base foundation to build virtual reality on.
So let's get back to those rules that you hate. You've already told us that we want to make sure the camera is really stable, that we don't do handheld shots.
Yep.
It's also because we're seeing in 360, we can't suddenly cut to a tight shot because that means we're going to a wide shot at a different angle. So what other suggestions do you have us consider as we play with this to make ourselves feel like we're being successful?
There's a couple things that you can do. And I wouldn't say that you can't go from a wide shot to a tight shot, because what you have to start thinking about is camera placement. Because what you're doing is you're taking the viewer and you're transporting them or teleporting them to a new direction. So you need some sort of an event that triggers a logical reason why you're moving. Right? Maybe it's a fade to black. Maybe it's a sound. Maybe it's a bright light. Maybe it's tracking some motion. And then you have to have a reason for why that camera shows up at the new location. So the example I'll give you is out of a series called Invisible. And there's a spoiler alert, but there's a section where you are this third person and you're kind of looking over in this room, and then it immediately cuts to this scene where the camera is placed on the ground. And it is the most uncomfortable feeling you've ever had, because it almost feels like you've been decapitated. Sorry to sound so negative. And it's very uncomfortable because we don't sit on the ground. But when you turn around and you look behind you, you're actually sitting in a pool of blood with a dead body. So as the movie unfolds and there's a reason for you to have this impact and end up on the floor, the impact of that transition is huge. And when done right, it is impactful, it's memorable, and helps further advance the story.
There's a lot of different VR cameras out there. Why should somebody consider Views?
The short answer is cost. The second part of it is ease of use. What we've done is we've made two different versions of the camera. One is an $800 product. The other is $1,200. Basically, the difference between the two is the $1,200 camera actually allows you to do live streaming and to be able to capture video directly to a hard drive on a computer. At those price points, with a system that can render out as high as 4096 by 4096, we can create content that exceeds the playback capability of VR headsets today. For not a lot of money, any filmmaker who has the bug or the curiosity to figure out how do I start to tell a story in VR can create some amazing content today.
And for people that want more information, where can they go on the web?
The easiest place to go is to views.camera. Now, I know it's a little confusing. There is no .com in there, but just views, VUZE.camera. That'll bring you to our Views camera website. There's samples that can be downloaded. You can learn about the product, and you can purchase right on that site.
And Jim Malcolm is the General Manager for North America for Humaneyes Technology, the folks that make the Views camera. And Jim, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Srinivas Krishna is the founder and CEO of the pioneering AR/VR studio called Awe Company Limited. For the past 6 years, he's been engaging mobile users with groundbreaking AR and VR experiences. Now he and his team are releasing a new mobile app that lets people create augmented reality videos using only their smartphones. It's called Geogram. Hello, Srinivas. Welcome.
Thank you, Larry. Glad to be here.
How would you describe what Awe Company does?
Our company, for the past 6 years or so, has been creating technologies and experiences for mobile users of augmented and virtual reality experiences. We're a studio that serves businesses and their users, essentially.
Why this? Why VR?
I had been making films for 20 years, and not long after the smartphone came out, I had a kid, and when I saw him engage with an iPad, which I didn't know how to turn on, I knew that life was really going to change, and I had to face the future head on. So I really did fall into a rabbit hole. I started exploring augmented reality and what I could do with mobile phones and devices, and there was no looking back.
So tell us about this new thing you've got called Geogram. What is it?
Geogram is a mobile app that lets you share your memories where they happen. Today, we have social media that essentially allows us to create a post about our experience at a place. It's about a place, but really the place itself is disassociated from the story or the memory or the video. What Geogram does is it allows us to mark our presence at a place with an augmented reality video that we can record and leave there and communicate our presence from that location and share it. And you can share it across your normal social media channels. But if you have the app, it transports you to that place in virtual reality where you can see that video. If you're at the location, you can see the video there playing for you and any other videos that go alongside it.
Well, I had the chance to watch the story that NBC News did on you, where they profiled Geogram. But give us an example that NBC talked about of how this is used in real life.
That was almost the first use case of the product, and we were still building it at the time. We had a client in Orlando who was building a memorial in honor of all those who'd been impacted by the tragedy of the shooting at the Pulse nightclub. We had told him about this app that we were building that might be just more useful and easier to use than the augmented reality projects that we've been doing till then. He was very excited about it. So we released an early version of it and asked him, if he would like to share it with people in his community. What happened was that people who were impacted by this tragedy started going to the location of the nightclub and leaving their sentiments, their statements for the people that they had lost at the location, much like a digital memento. I don't know how else to describe it. It was a digital memento. It was like a virtual shrine at the location. Extremely powerful experience for us. And it's really what got us down this road to say, there's something very powerful at the core of this technology and what we're able to enable with it. And we really felt compelled to develop it and release it.
What do you see as the differences between augmented reality, AR, and virtual reality, VR?
Augmented reality marries digital content with the world. So it can superimpose or embed a 3D object, a virtual object, or a video, or a picture, anything you want, into the world that you're looking at through the camera on your device. Virtual reality is an immersive experience that is 360 and completely envelops you inside its world. The result is they have different use cases. Augmented reality is very much something that you might do on the go. It's more active. You can be in motion. You can be walking around. Virtual reality, because it's so immersive, requires you often to sit down, be more passive, not as active in the experience of it.
Do you think VR's success is limited by the fact that every viewer needs to wear a headset, where with AR we don't?
I think there are different kinds of experiences and they have different ways that we measure their success. For example, movies have a certain kind of experience. They're successful. You have to go to the theater to have that theatrical experience. In the same way, I think virtual reality, we just need to look at the success of it differently. It's the kind of thing that maybe belongs in a basement or a man cave kind of experience. You're at home, it's passive, while AR is really much more ubiquitous. It gives you information about objects, about the world. It can, like with Geogram, it can give you more than just information. It can give you stories and memories and emotions.
With VR, we've been hearing the buzz about VR for a long time, but AR has sort of been flying below the radar. What's holding the technology of AR back?
Great question. What's been holding it back is really just that it needs to get on a great number of devices. And I think that's what's changing this year, is that both Apple and Android are embedding AR technologies inside their operating systems, so that now it's much easier to create content and consume it in a more exciting way. So the basic technologies that underlie AR are the ability to superimpose or position digital content realistically in the real world through a camera. Sounds easy the way I say it, but it's actually a lot harder than it sounds. The other piece of technology that is important for AR is the ability to share a piece of content between two or more people so that they're each able to experience the same digital content in the world, each from their own perspectives. These are now, starting to become more and more commonplace because the big, Apple and Google and Facebook and the big platforms are really investing in it and making it possible.
What do you see as the low-hanging fruit for AR? What apps and I use apps in the broader context, what uses will we see first?
I think a really great use case is wayfinding, helping you get around. A lot of people just have trouble with maps. I do. I look at maps and I say, oh, I'd rather just ask someone the directions. So I'm that kind of person. So now with AR, what you can do is you can point your phone at the world. It can recognize where you are, and you can tell it where you want to go, and it'll give you directions in real time. The other thing is you can get information about the world very easily just by looking at objects and at buildings and at your environment. In a sense, that's what Geogram enables you to do, is it enables you to experience the stories of a place. You go to a location, and it used to be, in fact, that to learn any kind of story, you had to go to the place where the story happened. I mean, this was a long time ago, but that's where you'd go, and people in the community would tell you the stories. Today, much of our stories are disconnected from places altogether. They live on screens, they live in print. They don't really have any physical bearing with that location anymore. What augmented reality does is it allows you then to go back to that place of stories residing in a place, which Geogram enables, for example, and there'll be others that'll do it over time. And that's a remarkable thing. It gives stories context. It gives them a setting. So these I see are the low-hanging fruit. They're things that anyone can do, and I think we'll start seeing that rolling out pretty quickly.
Has Geogram been released, and if so, what's the cost?
We are releasing Geogram, in fact, this week.
Congratulations.
It's live in the app stores. We're building new features every day. So we'd love people to start using it, especially content makers and creators. Because when you look through, there will not be many Geograms in the world. So we're starting, in a sense, from scratch. So we really love people to start sharing, their memories and their experiences and whatever you see or experience that is really, interesting to you, to other people on the platform.
And what does it cost?
And Geogram, you'll be happy to know, is absolutely free. And we hope to keep it free for individual users forever.
And for people who want more information about it, where can they go on the web?
They can find us at geogram.xyz.
That website is geogram.xyz, not .com, geogram.xyz. And Srinivas Krishna is the founder and CEO of the company that created it, which is Awe Company. And Srinivas, thanks for joining us today.
Larry, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Ethan Shaftel directs film, VR, immersive media, and interactive projects. His background is in spatial media and video installation projects. In fact, he's created media for multi-screen pop concerts and music festivals, as well as animation-wrapped floats for Disney. Hello, Ethan. Welcome.
Hi, Larry. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks.
Today we're talking about VR. What got you interested in VR in the first place?
I love interactive storytelling. I've always loved film, but I was never much of a gamer, but I loved Myst when it came out. And even though it was a game, you were solving puzzles. Myst, the old computer game, was so immersive and so story-driven that I felt like it was a great example of what could be done. But I felt like when VR came back on the scene about 3 years ago, that it was a wide open platform, a wide open media that could be defined in any way we want. And so a sort of interactive narrative VR experience doesn't need any more definition than just VR. Since it's new, we can make it whatever we want.
Is VR better suited for experiences as you describe, or better suited for education or narrative storytelling?
I mean, I think it's very suited to all these things. The power of the medium fully. I mean, we know the things that grab us instantly about VR the first time we put on a headset, and that's really, the immersion, that sense of presence. But that's only the first step. What do we do with that? We've transported an audience member, a viewer, or a participant somewhere. That's the first step of VR. Then what do we do? VR games are really obvious and obvious successes. I mean, it makes a ton of sense to then have that viewer, shoot zombies or play tennis, or that's going to work really well. Those are sort of obvious successes, and I don't mean to denigrate that when I say obvious, but that's sort of low-hanging fruit of VR. But then what else can we do? What type of other experiential or narrative experiences? Those require some more thought, and those are very much still in development right now.
Tell me about some of the projects that you're working on.
When I got into VR, I was doing prototypes and experiments and things on the side, sort of with my existing collaborators, a lot of people involved in animation and motion graphics. Sort of the first standalone piece that we decided to make and try to get into festivals was a mix of animation and live action called Extravaganza. And that was lucky enough to get into Tribeca last year and premiere there in April. That's opened a lot of doors subsequent to that, and we've been very fortunate about getting Extravaganza out there. And so now I've been working on a variety of things, most recently a piece for Red Bull, or a VR version of the classic bonus stage from Street Fighter II.
Films are generally viewed as part of a group in a theater. How do you answer the charge that VR, by isolating each viewer in their own headset, is an isolating experience?
That's a really interesting topic. We participate in different media in different ways. I don't think the idea that VR replaces or represents an evolution of film is accurate. There is huge overlap between VR and film in certain visual and storytelling ways. I mean, I think that overlap will continue to be something we explore, but it's not the same. VR, in that sense, at least the pieces that we see out there in the narrative space and the things that I've made and things like Extravaganza, they're more of an experience similar to something like a novel. We don't tend to read novels out loud to each other or, even in a room full of people. It is something that is a single person experience. A word that comes up a lot with great literature is immersion. You sink into it. You that feeling you're there. A little bit different from the literal immersion of VR, but similar, and overlapping. And so there's a place for single experiences or experiences that are primarily immersed in by an individual. What I think we see is that how we connect to great literature becomes really important to us and becomes a way of actually making social connections. On your, dating profile, you say your favorite book. And if someone else has that favorite book, that's really meaningful. That means that you guys should probably be talking. You should probably go have coffee. Going in deeply into an experience, it's when you come out and you start talking about it with others, sharing your experience, comparing and contrasting. That's what makes art social, even if it's not in a room full of people.
When you're creating your own VR experiences, what tools, what software do you use?
The first software that me and my collaborators were really using to experiment was Cinema 4D. And that's because it was already an animation software that we were using for traditional cinema projects, motion graphics, animation for that were not VR. C4D had already some really good tools and the ability to go into existing animations maybe you've already done and then use the virtual VR camera to export them and view them in a headset. And then learn, of course, what falls flat, how you need to rework staging and how you need to think about space in a different way. And that was really the key. You've got to start playing with it if you want to do it at all. And then as we grew, the software grew as well. I mean, the VR features are much more robust now than they were then. And that's really exciting to see sort of in concert with all of our sort of tests and experimentation.
There's stereoscopic 3D, there's 2D, there's 360 degrees versus 180 degrees. How do you pick the right format for a VR project?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. When I use the term VR, and even just in this conversation, I am very inclusive with that. I think that when the primary aspect, or at least sort of that initial aspect of the piece of art, regardless of what it is, transportation to a new world, replacing what the viewer sees and hears in their living room with something else, then that counts as VR, virtual reality. So something like Extravaganza, my initial VR movie, is stereoscopic 360 video. It means that it's 3 degrees of freedom. You can look around, but you can't get up and walk across the room. It's not interactive. It's a linear piece of media that's going to play from the beginning to end. And aside from the ability to look around at any location, in any place in that world, from your locked point of view, there is no interactivity. So I think that's very much VR, but of course the creator has to understand the technological limitations of that choice of what kind of flavor of VR you're going to use. So with Extravaganza, making it work with the storyline. In Extravaganza, the viewer becomes a puppet locked into a VR puppet show. You have a body that is interacting with other characters. You see it moving, but someone else is controlling you. That kind of storytelling works well with 360 video because it leans into that idea of lack of agency and the lack of control you have except for what you're seeing. But that wouldn't have been a good choice at all for the Street Fighter game. That needed to have a much higher level of agency because it really is a game. You're running, you're punching, you're kicking, you're moving, and you're scoring more or less points depending on the damage you do. So for that, we did it on a game engine with a 6 degree of freedom platform. I don't think that 360 ever hurts. If you can do it and make a wider field of exploration for the viewer, then I think that's a benefit, and it makes you think about attention and the audience's view of the world in a really good way. So I don't think it's meaningful to cut that down sort of arbitrarily. However, the technical side of it, there's a lot of advantages to only shooting 180. You have an off camera, you have the ability to hide equipment and use lighting in a different way. Plus, it can be less expensive.
Ethan, for people that want to be able to take a look at the projects you're creating, where can they go on the web?
You can find me at ethanshaftel.com.
That's all one word, Ethan, E-T-H-A-N, Shaftel, S-H-A-F-T-E-L, ethanshaftel.com. His website is excellent. Make a point to go visit. And Ethan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I was delighted to sit down and talk.
Here's another website I want to introduce you to, DoddleNEWS.com. DoddleNEWS gives you a portal into the broadcast, video, and film industries. It's a leading online resource presenting news, reviews, and products for the film and video industry. DoddleNEWS also offers a resource guide and crew management platform specifically designed for production. These digital call sheets, along with their app, directory, and premium listings, provide in-depth organizational tools for busy production professionals. DoddleNEWS is a part of the Thalo Arts community, a worldwide community of artists, filmmakers, and storytellers. From photography to filmmaking, performing arts to fine arts, and everything in between, Thalo is filled with resources you need to succeed. Whether you want the latest industry news, need to network with other creative professionals, or require state-of-the-art online tools to manage your next project, there's only one place to go, DoddleNEWS.com. Matthew Celia is the Managing Director and Creative Director of Lightsail VR. This is a company that creates engaging VR content. Hello, Matt. Welcome back.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
How would you describe Lightsail VR?
Lightsail VR is a Hollywood-based VR production company, and we are pioneering the evolving field of cinematic virtual reality storytelling. Our focus, being from a film background, is focusing on bringing compelling narratives, dynamic characters, and cool visuals to every project we touch. So far, we've made our names producing high-profile pieces for Google, ABC, GoPro, Paramount, to name a few. But we've just recently released our first original project called Speak the Devil.
Well, before we get to Speak of the Devil, isn't cinematic VR storytelling an oxymoron?
Oh, I disagree. I think you can always put a story into anything. It's just how you execute it and make it work for the medium.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about how you execute it. Tell us what Speak of the Devil is before we talk about how you created it.
Sure. Speak of the Devil at its heart is a campy horror film that takes place in the forest. It's about this woman who accidentally summons a demon. But the unique thing about it is that it is an interactive live-action film, much in the style of an immersive theater piece. And that was a unique challenge in VR.
What made it a unique challenge?
Well, what we had to do is we had to put together this story that made sense and figure out this logic programming so that the audience could explore it at their own place and go wherever they wanted to go, but we weren't going to lose, as you said, that storytelling, that narrative aspect.
But wait a minute, this is a horror film, and people are exploring a horror film under their own initiative. This horror, I'm afraid, is not my favorite subject, but this strikes me as something that people would not want to do.
Right, but horror-themed houses and haunted houses are very popular, and escape rooms and all that stuff. And so we're tapping into that. We're tapping into that thrill. And what we do is we drop you into the forest, and you meet these characters, and you go off searching, and things are just kind of not right. And eventually, we're ramping up that tension. Just as you would in a traditional screenplay. Like, we really broke it down into looking at, like, hey, there's the setup, the theme, the inciting incident, the all is lost moment, your final climactic end, and took that structure and we just started parceling it together.
Well, I want to come back to writing the script in just a minute, but before we do, what's the status of Speak of the Devil now?
Speak of the Devil has just been released a few weeks ago. It is available on the Google Daydream store and on the Gear VR, the Oculus store. It is for sale. It's like $3. So, forgo that one cup of coffee and check it out, I hope.
I hope you sell tens of thousands of them. I wish you great success.
Thank you.
Earlier tonight, Ethan Shaftel mentioned that writing a VR script is different from writing a normal film script. Would you agree or disagree? And if you agree, what makes writing a VR script different?
So I agree and I disagree. Like, I don't agree that you need to write a VR script where you describe, like, the quadrants, which is very popular for some reason. We say, in front of us, there's this. And to the left of us, this. That's the director's job. It's a director's job. Just like in a traditional screenplay, you wouldn't put every single camera angle, But it is different because I think you need to think carefully about how characters are entering and exiting a scene. I think you need to think about more descriptive places. And in this latest project that we did, we had to think about, well, how is the logic of an interactive story going to work so that it makes sense no matter how people experience it?
One of the things that I think you and I talked about the last time you were on, which is in November, and if not, take the credit for it anyway, because I found it incredibly brilliant, is that you made the analogy that VR is much more like staging a theater play than staging a traditional film. Would you still agree with that?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think like every project we do, we just kind of reinforce that, and it just proves it to us that VR narrative cinematic storytelling is like immersive interactive theater.
I love that phrase. All right, I'm going to steal that one from you too.
Cool.
When you were shooting this, what kind of camera gear were you working with, and what was your production hardware?
Yeah, so we shot with the GoPro Odyssey. We were so lucky and fortunate to be in the Google Jumpstart program, which is this amazing program from Google that gives indie filmmakers the camera and access to the post-production stitching software gratis, totally free, no strings attached. It's incredible. And we were able to shoot it at 5.7K, left eye and right eye, so it's quite a bit of data, at 60 frames a second. It really is, that's like the pinnacle of quality for stereoscopic live action VR right now.
And how did you edit it?
We edited it, and this is kind of funny actually, because we used Premiere Pro, and we broke every scene down into its own sequence, and we're editing each part, each scene individually because it's a narrative that has multiple options, right? But we found that we really couldn't experience it or play it back or understand how the audience is going to view it until we put it into a game engine. And so we used Unity to actually do the playback of it so that we could write all the logic code that would tell us when we could see each scene.
Did you shoot 360 or 180, and do you have an opinion on which format is better?
We shot 360, and we're actually about to do our first 180 piece in a couple weeks here. And I think the formats are very different. I think 180 for me, you lose some of that immersion, you lose some of that sense of presence that you get with 360. Like, because if you're turning your head to the left in 180, you're going to see a black line.
Mm-hmm.
But 180 is a lot easier to make, a lot easier to produce. The quality of the stereoscopic imagery and the resolution is a lot higher. And right now, when we're in these early days, when there's not really much of a monetization path and things still take so much longer, but the dollars aren't there, you need to come up with concepts and ideas that work not only creatively, but financially. And I think VR 180 is a really, really strong step in that direction.
So maybe you think VR 180 is an interim step before we have the equipment and the budgets for 360?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think it works really well for point of view stuff. Where you're talking to a person directly, but I think eventually it's all going to end up in 360 because you really do want that full presence, I find.
Well, this, I think, gets to a bigger question. Can VR really become mainstream when we all need to wear a headset to see it?
You know, I think right now our headsets remind me of the Gordon Gekko cell phones, right? They're big, they're clunky. People are like, oh, that's never going to take off. Who's going to have a cell phone in your car? But now look at where we're at, right? When you're starting to wear glasses with augmented reality where the lenses become fully opaque, that's virtual reality. And I think that there is location-based experiences that are really popular and theme park experiences that are really popular. You know, will it be as popular and ubiquitous as the television? I don't know, but I really think that there is a strong market and a strong group of people who enjoy escaping from their reality for a few minutes a day.
So it sounds like overall you're pretty optimistic.
I am, especially with the Oculus Go that's coming out later this year. This is a $200 standalone headset. You don't need a Samsung phone or a special phone. You don't need anything. It's very affordably priced, and it has access to all of the amazing content on the Oculus Store. I think that the cost right now is still too high, and when that hits the market, I think we're going to start seeing consumers adopt in even bigger ways.
You've done a number of VR projects. Now that you've got some experience under your belt, what's the number one piece of advice you'd give a producer who's starting to experiment with it for the first time?
Know your whole workflow. Know it from beginning all the way to distribution. A lot of these tools are really new, and they're always in beta. And a lot of the distribution platforms are always in beta, and so things are changing a lot. So you need to work with a partner who is up on it, knows the whole pipeline from A to Z, because they will help you achieve a better quality product because they know all of the little gotchas at every step of the way that, you know, segmenting it out you might miss.
And for people that want more information about the kind of creative projects you're coming up with, where can they go on the web?
You can check us out at www.lightsailvr.com.
That's all one word, LIGHTSAIL VR, Lightsail VR, and the managing director and creative director of Lightsail VR is Matthew, Celia, and Matt. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate you having me back.
Always a pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye. I was just thinking, most of us look at the world based on what we know. For example, most of us are filmmakers in some form and look at the world through a media lens. This often colors how we view new technology, such as VR and AR, that we're talking about tonight. Jim Malcolm made a good comment this evening that helped me understand this better when he said that VR is not a replacement for traditional filmmaking any more than TV was a replacement for film. Years ago, when I first heard of VR, I was puzzled because I couldn't see how it would benefit narrative storytelling or traditional filmmaking. What I've learned since is that I'm trying to put a square peg in a round hole. VR isn't filmmaking. It's its own thing. A better way to think of VR is that we're creating the digital equivalent of live theater. Theater can be just as involving, emotional, and uplifting as the best films, but it uses entirely different techniques and technology to tell its stories. The same with VR. The more we think of it as filmmaking, the more frustrated we'll become. That's why experimenting with this format is so important. We need to try it for ourselves, see what works, and what existing skills we need to unlearn. VR provides us, especially those of us with theater backgrounds, with an opportunity to provide expanded services to our clients. The world of VR is still young. There's room for more people like us to explore and expand the medium, and along the way, it provides those who do with the ability to generate more revenue and stand out from the increasingly crowded filmmaking pack. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with paying the rent and sleeping soundly at night. VR gives us the opportunity to explore something new and make money with it at the same time. Just something I'm thinking about. I want to thank our guests for this week, Jim Malcolm with Humaneyes, Srinivas Krishna with the Awe Company, VR filmmaker Ethan Shaftel, VR filmmaker Matthew Celia, and James DeRuvo of DoddleNEWS.com. There's a lot of history in our industry, and it's all posted to our website at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Here you'll find thousands of interviews, all online and all available to you today. And remember to sign up for our free weekly show newsletter that comes out every Saturday. Talk with us on Twitter at DPBuzz and Facebook at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Our theme music is composed by Nathan Doogie Turner, with additional music provided by smartsound.com. Text transcripts are provided by Take One Transcription. Visit takeone.tv to learn how they can help you. Our producer is Debbie Price. My name is Larry Jordan, and thanks for listening to the Digital Production Buzz. The Digital Production Buzz is copyright 2018 by Thalo LLC.